I came from Poland to give this talk about technologies you can use for creation of mobile applications with JavaScript. I'm really glad that we have such an order of talks, and we had this wonderful talk before me, and it appeared to be like a smooth introduction to what I'm going to talk right now. And I hope everyone been there. So we stop on the moment that we've got more browser APIs, and we kind of do a lot of stuff on the web right now. And it's also applicable to mobile applications, and as a JavaScript developers, we like to put our dirty hands everywhere. Like we want to create backends, we want to create mobile apps. We can even write software for microcontrollers in JavaScript, and it's kind of cool. But before we actually start, we need to answer two questions. They're very simple questions. First one is who we are as a businesses and what's the reason why we create those mobile applications for. And the second question, also quite straightforward, is why we want to build a mobile application. Many years ago, mobile apps were the only reason how you can potentially access different mobile APIs, such as camera, Bluetooth, and if you wanted to have some connectivity, take data from microphone, you had the only safe way to go to build a mobile application. And currently there is this shiny and beautiful PWA specification which actually allows you to do all this stuff. You can build tools for communication, for photo editing, for navigation, whatever you can build in a browser. And one of the reasons why we still have so many applications for different platforms is this. As a business, we always want to have constant contact with our customers, and we want to establish this communication channel between us and them. Like, okay, they signed, they installed our application, so now we can penetrate them always with our push notifications and tell that we want something from them. So this small reason is actually what forces us to still stick to native applications sometime. And just to make sure a little bit about my background, I've been working with all those JavaScript mobile wizardry for 5 years already, and had a chance to try different technologies for it. I'm not technological advocate of any of those, so I'll be honest, and I'll try to explain what we faced and help you to make proper decisions. So if you are hesitating and you want to understand what is the better fit, I believe this talk is for you. As a company in the team, we were successful at a couple of very important things, and we did many mistakes, we missed many deadlines. We fought with 14 bugs which nobody had understanding how to fix, and it taken significant parts of our development time. Incompatibility problems, explaining our customers why their small improvement is not possible to implement in any reasonable time, and to explaining why we failed the moderation in App Store, and it's the question what nobody knows answer for. But one important thing we've done is we ended up delivering those applications. And the reason why I'm giving this talk is to go through these bullets and explain what can go wrong and bring you straight to these yellow bullet points. Let's start from the simple. For purpose of this talk, we'll go into oversimplification, and let's imagine that our browser is a car, and JavaScript is just engine of this car. And engine couldn't go anywhere without wheels and everything else, and car couldn't go anywhere without engine. So What we see on the screen isn't actually JavaScript, it's the DOM tree and this render way of the browser. And we have JavaScript somewhere behind, which gets triggered on some events by browser and can send instructions to the browser what is supposed to be changed. It's very important to agree on it right now. When we try to do this action, when we send application to the home screen, for example, if it's progressive web application and we want it to be less like web but more like native, but still not native, we can add service workers, add this manifest file, specify how it's going to look like when user is going to put it on home screen, and we'll just change our browser here to WebView. It's really important because not everywhere it runs exactly in the same browser as the system browser is. For example, in newest iOS, currently it's run in the WebView, which is slightly different from Safari in terms of permissions and how it works. So I suggest you to check out the specification before actually doing something. And well, it still works, but if you want to deliver those push notifications I mentioned, you still are limited to only Android as a platform. Because on iOS you couldn't send push notification right now, and I'm not sure it's going to be possible anytime soon, because kind of Apple is also business and then want you to pay $99 every year for deploying applications, and now you shouldn't pay anything, so I think it's obvious. So the simplest reason is to get your web application, pack it into the WebView, and this technology is really old and has quite a negative opinion in community is Cordova, and you can just take a website, put into WebView. Cordova is not the only way to do so, but one of the most popular ones. And from this point, you have this layer of plugins which you can trigger from your JavaScript and add support of various things, including push notifications. Just also to double check that we are on the same page, I'm talking only about applications which are just simple business apps. If you are doing something like I want to make a black-white photo with background blurred when I rotate my phone on 72 degrees, it's not about what I'm talking about right now. So the next option is was to abstract this JavaScript engine further and go to conception, where we have this separate JavaScript engine, and it's something what is similar to Node.js, like you have JavaScript code, but it's executed somewhere, and you couldn't access DOM from this JavaScript, but you have this React Native layer, which just manipulates the native components like Marionette, and you can specify like, okay, this should be this should be this, but what you see on the screen is actually a native application. It's kind of not also about only React Native. The similar conception is also behind NativeScript, and I think NativeScript is a very beautiful piece of technology. Unfortunately, it's not that popular, not much big companies behind it, and not much money invested in, so not that stable and not so developed in terms of infrastructure. And from this point, I'll play a game with you, and we'll cover gossips, and I will ask you questions, like do you agree with me or not? And if you agree, please raise your hands. First question. It's always said that with hybrid mobile apps, you can write code once. Who agrees with this? Please raise your hands. I like you. Really, I like you. Because actually not. And you can name it differently. Of course, as an engineer, if you have especially some high seniority degree, you can say, no, it's not if else, it's adapter pattern or it's facade, but it's not if else. But again, under the hood, you end up having conditions in various form that, okay, for this particular browser, I want to have side menu. For iOS, I want to have tabs in the bottom, because they are simply having different UIs. And it's even considering this fantastic assumption that you agree with the business that applications are going to be the same on various platforms. So, well, it's still doable to save some time writing duplicated code. Of course, it's not going to be 2 times faster, but something is going to be encapsulated. And if you are using, for example, something like Redux or MobX, you can take state outside and share it, and you can take data points or work with your APIs. You can abstract logic in views into high-order components and also encapsulate those high-order components. But it is still kind of limited. Especially there is also a new fashion trying to separate, like unite even more platforms and try to share code also with web. Like if I'm having React Native and I'm using some libraries from React, probably I can also add web here and do something like this. It's kind of possible, but for example, there is a need to change something only on the web. Like small change. It's okay. You add some additional condition in these components which applies only to the web. And now I have a question. How many platforms do you need to conduct regression testing on? So you increase amounts of platforms you need to test after each change, and it's not sometimes obvious. So it's very crucial if you want to do such kind of code sharing to cover as much as you can with unit tests and integration tests, and it really saves a lot of time. Next question. JavaScript is enough to create mobile applications. Please raise your hands who agree with this statement. Oh. It's hard to trick Italian people. In reality, it's not, especially if trying to interact with different sorts of native APIs. Like you have plugin, you have instruction how to install this plugin. It's just 25 bullets what you need to specify and configure in Xcode and in Gradle to let it work. Afterwards, you want to install another plugin, and you see that's okay, I already modified this piece of native code with like snippet from previous plugin, and what could I do next? And I'm kind of not Swift developer and how it works. Animations, notifications again, like there is a cool technology for React Native, like a whole platform, it's called Expo. And for example, you agreed with your backend, okay, we are not going to use Expo push notifications, but we want to stick to Amazon simple push notification service. And apparently you can end up understanding that you need to do something like create React App Reject button Expo, and you are not into Expo ecosystem anymore, so you still need to do some configuration and install all these modules manually. So, okay. Next. You can simply estimate front-ends and implement mobile application for using front-end estimates. Is there anyone who agrees? I had to prepare more complicated questions, I think. It's one of the trickiest points, because if you are an agency, by the way, please raise your hands who are working not in product companies, but in agencies, like outsourcing companies and stuff like this. Not too many of you, but it's especially applicable for you. If you are trying to sell something to your clients, you need to tell them how much is it going to cost. And if you are going with JavaScript mobile applications and you do not have sufficient expertise, it's going to be quite a tricky estimate, especially if you are thinking about doing something fixed price. So there are some problems which might appear, and as a front-end JavaScript engineers, you might not be familiar with those problems, and you spend resources trying to investigate, or you still involve native developers trying to, oh, dude, please help me, like this studio doesn't work again, and I don't know why my emulator is broken. It worked yesterday, but it doesn't work today, and it's something that's happening quite often. Native modules conflicting, and you need to involve, again, native devs to fix it or learn some Kotlin, Swift. The next point is views, especially if you are talking about React Native or native script. You couldn't use HTML, you couldn't use CSS, you used to, and conception of arranging all the elements on the page, conception of styling everything, it's totally different. It's something you need to learn, and your team is going to need to learn, and it's something what is not going to be covered in a couple of days. Like, no, and some things which are obvious for native developers, but we don't have experience with, like handling of notch, handling of persistent storage, and a couple of other things. We'll cover them later. It's not so obvious for us as a front-end developers how it works. Knowing one language doesn't help us to understand the specifics of other platforms. So just an advice, that's time which you'll try to save during estimation process and during investigation process will hurt you hard, and it's much bigger problem than it actually seems. So you need to go into education and check that styling difference, UX practices are different, and it's also very important that we have usually this gut feeling after years of working in the industry, okay, this should be this should be here, and okay, it's going to kind of work. On mobile, it's not, and we need to learn how to work with persistent storage, because on the web we usually stick to some local storage and that's it. We don't keep many files or any complicated data on the front end. Now it's a little bit different. Behavior components is different. Like as a web developer, I haven't knew in the very beginning what is a scroll view and how it's different from list view. Also, I need to learn it to maintain some reasonable performance, because they differ, especially in performance. Routing is different. There is no like this HTTP history API, and you need to learn it from the very beginning. Animations are different, and sometimes not everything is possible. Like if we're talking about estimates, for example, if I would ask how much is it going to implement a screen, which after clicking a button will collapse in like in a circle button with small text. Is there anyone who can give this answer without spending a couple of days on investigation? Neither do I. And such questions appear, and native devs, they usually know answers for these things because they are working with native apps full time. We are not. So what I wanted to say that good front-end engineer isn't usually a good mobile engineer, and knowing just the same language doesn't work. You can learn, if you write already one programming language, you can learn Java in 20 days, but you wouldn't ever learn the whole infrastructure in just 1 year. It will take you years to become proficient in whole infrastructure and all libraries, frameworks, and approaches, patterns. So the same is kind of applicable here. So only JavaScript doesn't solve the whole picture. Next question. Is it cheaper? Is there anyone who agrees that hybrid apps are cheaper? Okay, we've got one person. But actually, it's kind of true. This time it's kind of true. Because company, and for you it's a decision if you are ready to hire two separate people to work on mobile applications, or you have a couple of web devs and you are ready to undertake this risk, it might be really helpful for you. And you need to answer a couple of questions first. The one, if applications are going to be identical, you need to accept this question and this decision from business perspective first. That's okay, we have some limitations. We need to embrace them, and only in this case it might work for us. Not much to say here. The next one is this, and it's very popular. Who agrees with this, that hybrid applications are ugly? It's also okay. Actually, I think all applications are ugly before styling, including native ones. And if you ever written a native application and you put a button without proper styling, it doesn't look better than JavaScript application or anything else. So you need to conduct some styling, you need to conduct some UX work, and it's applicable not only to React Native and technologies around it, but also to Cordova and stuff like this. And there are some libraries I am not actually going to focus on each one here, but I want to say that it's something like using Bootstrap on a web or any other library which helps. More interesting situation is with Cordova and PVA. If you want to make your PWA look like native application, there are ways to do so, and there is a popular library. It is called Ionic Framework. It has all those components which imitate native UIs, so they update the framework every year, adding new styles of different components. And for example, you have those modal windows, you have those scroll views, you have those panels, and they constantly updating those designs to look like you have really a native application, to look like some system UI components which are present in other places. They are quite good, and currently I'm working on a side project. It's written in Onsen UI, and it's kind of PWA, which in any given moment can be wrapped into Cordova and be delivered to the market if it's needed. And I found it's a good discovery for me. I really like how it works. But there is a problem behind it. And if you choose one of these technologies, you need to update them quite often. Otherwise, people who open the application will see that, okay, it doesn't look like my system UI. It looks like my system 3 years ago or 4 years ago. And you need constantly maintain this with every year release, major release of operation system. You need to update the libraries there, and not always those libraries are compatible, and you need to take care. What else is important that it's also applicable to React Native and using components for React Native, because when you use those native components for notifications, for UI elements, for I/O controls, you constantly need to update your React Native stack. And sometimes older plugins aren't compatible with newer plugins, and newer plugins aren't compatible with newer versions of React Native, and you can get into this loop then where updating is very expensive and you simply stuck with some particular stack. So it needs to be taken carefully. What else I want to say? I think there is no reason to ask this question, but there is a prejudice that, okay, we have many people on the market who can write JavaScript code. It's kind of true, and we can just put front-end people into mobile application, but no, it doesn't work this way, because like we have some people who work with JavaScript. We have some people who worked with hybrid apps, and only some of them had really experience with it. And if you want to go with decent level of seniority and predictability of how it's going to work and how it's going to end up, I think it's going to be quite hard. And it is something what we are currently experiencing. We have more than 300 JavaScript developers in our company, and we hardly can find people who can contribute properly into React Native proper projects. Some of them want to try React Native, but they say, okay, I want to try, but I have never tried it before. And it's actually a deal breaker, especially if it comes to building some proper application which is bigger than just simple create, read, update, delete application. And okay, we have mentioned it before, but we have front-end dev, and now we start asking ourselves questions which we don't know answers for, and again, we still waste our time. So when you want to go with React Native application, I suggest you to ask yourself a couple of questions. First question is it possible to estimate any given task, or almost at least biggest part of the task, without saying, okay, we have optimistic estimate, which is 2 times lower than pessimistic, because risk range is so huge and we don't know what can go wrong. And is it possible to forecast? Like as a business, you have some go, you want to deliver the application in half a year, and it makes sense to do something like proper decomposition, and it's also very important when you work on STM. It's not only about React Native actually and hybrid mobile apps, but decomposition is very, very important here. And what really makes sense is to break down everything before actually writing a code and decide what is going to be shared, what is not going to be shared, what architecture are you choosing, because some state management systems are more coupled with the representation where some are totally detached, like Redux, for example. And I think actually it's one of the places where Redux actually works well because it's very distant from the representation, and you can encapsulate it into library. You can use something like Verona to manage different NPM packages as a part of one repository, and it really pays off. And you need to decide who pays for it. It's something what I mentioned before, that if you are a small business or startup and you want to iterate quickly, it's a really good option for you, and you can achieve some results if you agree to undertake some risk and undertake some limitations which might occur during the development process. Also very important topic which cause some controversy in the community, that hybrid apps are declined by stores. It's unfortunately true for many reasons, but none of those reasons is that there is JavaScript. The reasons are actually following. If your application looks the same as your website and doesn't provide any valuable motivation why it is separate application and why it replicates web functionality, it's most likely going to be rejected. Online-only applications, like if you put big banner, okay, you need to update your app or you need to connect to internet in order to use this application, they are rejected sometimes they are not, and it's hard to pick where is the degree and what kind of applications which are online only are rejected. Apple takes care at performance, and if your application is slow and buggy on some older iPhones, like 6 or 7, you might be declined, and it's one of the reasons actually why many phone gap applications were declined in the past, because they didn't provide sufficient user experience and were noticeably slower than their native counterparts. And well, if you don't support different screens, you're going to be rejected. It's also mostly about App Store, because Google don't really care much. And another thing which is also can be affected on both platforms, like you creating an app and you want to take permissions and you're going to Stack Overflow, you see, okay, take permissions for everything, and you think, okay, I will take permissions for everything and I will just use what I need. It doesn't work anymore, and if you are trying to request data which is not actually used in your application, you're going to be rejected. And one bullet I forgot to add here, but for example, you are doing Cordova application, and you have actually a couple of ways how you can get your location. You can call Android API and request location, or you can try to call HTML API and try to request location. And first one will request this permission during installation, and will hit this big modal window that do you really want to allow this application to get your location. And the second, depending on the platform, may not. And it might be the reason of declination, because you can kind of trick the user and get the data from this user without actually his consent for these steps. One of the worst stereotypes, it's absolute bullshit right now. And it was kind of true 5 years ago, when there was only Cordova and PhoneGap, when we had really small, slow mobile devices. But now, I wouldn't say technologies evolved, but mobile devices evolved. And the reason why you paid so much for your mobile phone is to allow us JavaScript developers to deliver like those terrible applications. So like it's said true that technology, like technology evolves quicker and its development and price for it is cheaper than price for proper engineering work. So it works how it works. So now it's not the case, and if you do a proper web app packet in Cordova, it's fast enough. There are a couple of unsolved problems in the community and in the ecosystem that native modules complicates the process of updating of React Native, and once you started changing those native files, you couldn't always update React Native. In the past, it was changing quite often, so it was also tricky to update it. Not always was compatible, and it was horrible. All pieces of infrastructure for all given technology on the markets are third-party, and they not always play together. You need to play with versions. Sometimes you need to fix something. A couple of times we ended up forking plugins, inviting native developers to fix those native plugins for us and install them. Expectations mismatch. It's one of the biggest problem of hybrid applications when people think, okay, I will just take it and pay twice as less, and I will do the same with JavaScript. I don't need to hire people. Not, it's a compromise, and till we understand what are pros and cons of technology, we are safe to go. But one of the biggest problem, I think, is the big hype around all this ecosystem, and being sober is the most important decision what you can make here. And high level of engineering culture is required, especially considering that you encounter different platform which you are not working on full time in most cases, until you are like full-time React Native developer, but I don't think there are many of such people here. So, how to start? Pick technology based on your rational conclusions. I will tell about a couple of cases quickly. In my spare time, I'm working on application for DNA research, and I'm just analyzing people DNA sequences and provides them information like, okay, you have chances of getting diabetes and dying at 50, so I suggest you doing this, this, and this. Or you have chance of getting glaucoma of eyes, so if you have a pain in the lower head section, I suggest you go into the doctor to check, to measure your pressure in your eyes and prevent you from going blind. And I participate in one business program, one incubator, and I get input from people quite often, like, it would be good to have this, this, and this. And I need to iterate quickly. And for these reasons, there is no reason to pick a proper mobile app. I have PWA, which I can send link to, and as soon as we are ready to go on the market and check how it works, it's a matter of half an hour to pack it into Cordova bundle, and it's ready to go. Before, I've been working on application for underground construction mills, where we're optimizing the process with machine learning, and it was easier and more reasonable to use React Native to encapsulate this machine learning stuff into native model, and it also paid off. So depending on what we are working on, it makes sense to choose rationally. Don't follow the fashion and think, okay, Cordova it has better reputation, and people which we drink beer together will judge me and say, oh, you are not cool anymore, I don't want to drink beer with you because you are using Cordova on your application. So it's not the case. You need to define and decompose your tree of components in the very, very beginning and check what is going to be shared, because writing and deciding, refactoring what is going to be shared after writing is much more expensive. Automated tests are a king, actually. It saved us in so many situations. We've been working on native applications, so I suggest doing so. Before starting writing the codes, it makes sense to check what plugins are you going to use and just create some small proof of concept and check are those plugins playing well together or not, because it will help you to understand if you need to invite people who will write proper plugins or not. And only afterwards it makes sense to start forking. So what? I hope I wasn't pessimistic. My motivation wasn't to prevent you from using all this JavaScript magic into mobile world, but I just wanted to ask you to be reasonable. Probably you save some time fighting with 14 bucks or suffering from wrong decision. I think that even if those technologies aren't something what works for you, they are beautiful piece of engineering and they're totally worth to try in your spare time. But if you are small and you need to have some prototype, proof of concept, MVP, I think it might be a really good option for you. So thank you. I think that's it. I'm staying here, and you want to discuss anything else, we can meet afterwards. And any questions right now are also welcome.